Welcome back to another episode of Truth from the Booth, the segment where we sit down with the voice of the Wildcats, Wyatt Thompson, and break down the previous and upcoming games for Kansas State. Wyatt, as always, thanks again for dropping by today.
My pleasure. Good to be with you, Kolby.
So it was a tough weekend for Kansas State. They got knocked off by Mizzou in Columbia. That was, kind of an F in the chat moment. Just recapping the loss to Missouri. What were your key takeaways that cost Kansas State the game?
Well, I think what Coach Kleiman said afterwards was right on the money, and it was plenty of opportunities to win the game, right? Whether you want to talk about offense, defense, or special teams, I think you can hit all three and say, well, if this would have happened or that would have happened, you probably could come up with something in all three phases. I think about, Ben Sennett as an example had a wonderful game, but he had one drop that if he catches it, K-State could maybe pull the game out with a late score when it's tied at 27. As just one example. At the end of the day, I think for me, it was all about missed opportunities, but also about let's credit Mizzou for the big plays. They hurt K-State there. I think that was one thing that happened in the game that really surprised me. I thought K-State's run defense was good, but way too many big plays, frankly.
Yeah, there were a lot of explosive plays that were given up. Just felt like Luther Burden had her number, and anything that he wanted, he was getting it. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna add to that. I mentioned on a couple of shows yesterday, and I think this is legit too. Luther Burden was good. There's no doubt. He's a superstar kind of talent. But I hope everybody recognizes how good Brady Cook was, and like Will Howard was playing through some pain for part of that game. And then the other factor too was, even though they didn't run the ball very well, they had the Cody Schrader one decent run. Those other two receivers, Mookie Cooper and Theo Weiss, were good enough around Luther Burden that it made Burden even that much more difficult from my perspective to deal with. K-State was better in the man defense than they were in the zone against them. That's a pretty obvious statement. But also, you just too many times miscommunication or big plays really flatten the Cats, no doubt about it.
Oh, absolutely. And just the explosives, they were all over the place. And Kansas State's bread and butter last year, I felt like, was acquiring explosive plays and then not giving up as many. And then there are more explosive plays given up this time around than I think folks had anticipated. So I just want to get into something from a broadcaster to broadcaster thing, because
Sure.
This is Truth from the Booth, right? So we're trying to peel back some of the mystery, show the man behind the curtain, right? And it was as frustrating a loss as I've experienced as a Kansas State fan. I was very frustrated with how that ended, and it just felt like, of course, Kansas State is the team that gets the kid that drills a career PR of 7 yards and an SEC record of 61 yards in the rain on a field goal. Naturally, it happens to Kansas State. But as a sports broadcaster, I know all too well how hard it is to remain cool and collected and upbeat. How do you do that? What's your philosophy on that? Because I would have been so upset in the booth.
Well, I think at the end of the day, what I was taught early on is that your audience is, I'll use this example, your audience is probably 95+% K-State, right? But there are going to be some that are KU fans or Mizzou fans or Oklahoma fans or whatever it might be. And for them, you can be a homer and yet be professional with it. Sure. I got asked earlier about how do you just handle that gut punch of the 61-yard field goal? And it's like, well, I'm not sure how I do it. You just have to do it. If you go back and listen to the call, you can tell I'm disappointed that he made the kick. But at the end of the day, in those conditions that you laid out, pretty frankly, that was a bomb of a kick. And at the end of it, you kind of just have to tip your cap. They were just this much better than K-State in really almost every way on Saturday. Frustrating? Absolutely. Will they recover from it and move on? I think they will, but it stings. There's no doubt about it.
Hi, My name is Ryan Gilbert. I'm a former sports broadcaster for Wildcat 91.9, KState alum, and basketball recruiting editor for GoPowerCat.com. The last academic year was a historic one for the station, as Wildcat 91.9 was named the best college radio station in the nation by the Intercollegiate Broadcasting System Awards, the first national championship in program history. However, despite all the awards and success, the budget for Wildcat 91.9 continues to be cut year by year. I'll be perfectly frank with you. Either Wildcat 91.9 finds new funding through charitable giving, or it will permanently go off the air. That's why I'm asking you today to consider making a tax-deductible contribution to the station so that the longest continuously running college FM radio station in the nation can continue to train the next generation of media stars. To make a contribution or discuss options for creating an endowment fund, please reach out to us at www.wildcat919.com/donate. That's www.wildcat919.com/donate. Thanks so much. Go Cats, and always remember that at Wildcat 919, you belong.
Yeah. Well, and so looking ahead to UCF, this might sound stupid, but it feels like this is going to be a battle for which team has the healthier quarterback, right? Will Howard, he gets dinged up against Missouri. John Rice Plumlee, he's out for the next couple of weeks unless something changes today or in the next coming days, and he seems not available for the game on Saturday. So to me, this comes down to a game with which quarterback can make the better plays in the Big 12 opener. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you make a good point. You know, Will did gut his way through that game the other day. You could tell he was hurting. I think he will be available, but I don't know that he would be, close to 100% in just a matter of a few days. I think that's the thing you concern yourself with. John Rice Plumlee is a heck of a player. There's no doubt about that. But if you notice, and yes, you can talk about competition all day long, but McLean did a really nice job against Villanova. He's left-handed. He's athletic. He can run. He throws on the move well. And what hurt K-State at Mizzou was athletic receivers. This bunch is pretty athletic too. They may not have Luther Burden, but those three guys in unison may be as good as the three that Mizzou had. Mm-hmm. That is concerning. So K-State's probably got to clean up some things. For me, I get what you're saying, but I would turn it a little bit and say, for me, I think this game is going to come down to how good is UCF in the trenches. They've dominated their three games. Even though they won at Boise 18-16 on a last-second field goal, they went up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down in the field on it. They just did. But they turned the ball over in the red zone. You hope they play like that, but the chances are they probably won't. It's a dynamic offensive team. At least that's what we think. I don't know that they're as good as the numbers would indicate, but they are athletic, and you better respect them because they fly around and they play hard. They're well coached too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk about tipping the cap. You always have to tip the cap to Gus Malzahn with what he did at Auburn. I distinctly recall a 2014 game at the beginning of the year against Auburn that Kansas State, where it was a couple of field goals away from winning that game. Would have been a big time win for the program at the time after an Auburn squad that was in the national title game a couple of times. So I never want to leave him out of a game as a coach.
Well, he's done a really nice job at UCF too. If you go back to Big 12 media days when I was in Dallas, most everybody that you talked to felt like UCF was the most Big 12 ready of the four newbies, right? I think we remember talking about that. And so here we are, K-State. They give K-State a home game to start conference play, which is really nice of the Big 12. Really appreciate that very much. But yet it's a pretty risky home game too, right out of the gate against a team that's pretty athletic and that you don't know as well as some of the others. So how big of an advantage is it? Well, sure, it's big to be at the Bill, right? I mean, you can't downplay that. But this is a big game for K-State because you got the off week, you kind of need it after UCF, and then back-to-back road games. So this is a very important, 3-4 week stretch for the Cats. No doubt about that.
Absolutely. And I think I crunched my numbers correctly, but out since 1990, only 9 times has Kansas State started Big 12 play at home. So that should say everything that you need to know outside of this season. This season would be number 10. So
it's crazy. It shouldn't be that way, but it has been that way.
Great.
You're right. Yeah.
It's not that great. This has been my dad's apex gripe every football season is we're not starting at home. We're starting on the road against Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, or so it feels. Now the storyline of the week, I'm personally starting to feel concerned at the linebacker position, which was, 3 weeks ago, it was the major strength of the defense. They had a bunch of depth, but then Jake Clifton gets hurt and he's out. Deuce Green seems to be out for the season now, unless I'm hearing something different. And then true freshman, which is awesome that he's in, but you're going to put in a true freshman at Mike linebacker until further notice. So how are we feeling about that?
Well, there's some consternation about it. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. Let's put into perspective, if indeed Daniel Green is done for the year, which is the speculation out there, what are you losing? Well, you're losing almost 250 career tackles. I think he's at 232. You're losing a guy who's been here 6 years. He's battled through lots of injuries. But for me, when you boil all of the water out of it, you're talking about a first or second team type all Big 12 talent. And to lose that with that kind of experience is pretty monumental. Will they survive it? Sure. Having Jake Clifton available would help. And I think he's getting closer, but maybe not this week. We'll see how that plays out. I like Austin Romaine a lot, and I think KState can mix and match with some guys too. And I'm not sure it's even something that should bring up here, but I'm going to anyway. Okay. What happens if they just play a couple of linebackers and 6 DBs? I think I could see that against UCF.
Okay,
I'm not predicting it, but just thinking out loud a little bit. But Romaine will probably more than likely start from what I think will happen. And you know what we said early, he's going to be good. He just lacks experience. He's good enough to play. But again, experience counts.
Oh, definitely.
That's a tough blow though. No question.
Oh yeah. Well, and that from a student of the game standpoint, I'd be very fascinated to see a 3-2-6. What do we even call that? It's not nickel anymore because you've got more than 5 right. DBs. Is there something that you would call that, or just a hybrid 3-2-6?
Yeah, I think most people call it, a nickel package and then the dime package with the 6 DBs. And the reason I say that is, let me just run down and throw a few names at you that you could potentially put in there against their 3 and 4 wide receiver set. And this is away from the guys that start. Jordan Wright, Keenan Garber, Justice James, Kenaitel Thomas, Kolby McAllister. That's a lot more bodies and guys than what you may have at the moment at linebacker. That's the only reason I thought about it, is because
sure.
It's all about numbers, man. Just what it is.
Hey, I'm a strategist at heart. I'm terrible at chess. I get destroyed every time, but I love the strategy of it. And football's a chess match. It's a chess match with more people on the board, so to speak. Well, Wyatt, as always, I appreciate your time. That'll wrap it up for us in today's edition of Truth from the Booth. Appreciate Wyatt, as always, giving generously of his time. Stay tuned for later this week as Training Camp with Kolby Van Camp takes up a new life as not just an audio podcast, but a visual podcast as well. So be sure to give us 5 stars wherever you're finding us in terms of your listenership, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or hit like and subscribe on YouTube. Thanks again for tuning in. You've been listening to Truth from the Booth.